Okay, welcome to the Unit 2 test review. We are going to go over the multiple choice questions, and I will give you some helpful hints, some suggestions, some pointers, although I won't be simply giving the answer, but I will guide you towards the correct answer. So let's begin with Chapter 4, which deals with Epicurus. All right, so the first question has to do with atomism. You will recall that atomism is a cosmology. It is a particular understanding of the nature of the universe. And according to atomism, all beings, all existing things are made up of atoms. So atoms are the simplest components of the physical universe. So an atom is literally an uncuttable bit of matter, right? The atom is the basic building block out of which everything that exists is made. And according to Epicurus, atoms are neither created nor destroyed. They are eternal. They exist eternally. They have no beginning and no end. They have always existed and always will exist. Compounds, on the other hand, are clusters of two or more atoms. A human being is an extremely complex compound made up of, let's say, trillions of atoms. Now, compounds do not exist eternally. A compound comes into being and passes out of being. So you, as a human being, at one point in time did not exist, and then you became a fertilized ovum, then you became a fetus, then you were born, and you went through infancy, childhood, young adulthood, and so on. And at some point, you will cease to exist. You, as an individual, will no longer exist, and you will die. And the atoms that make up your body will disperse back into nature and form other compounds, right? So the lesson to be learned here is that the atom itself is eternal, but the compounds, the clusters of atoms, are not eternal. They come into being and they pass out of being, right? Okay, so death for Epicurus is the cessation of consciousness, awareness, perception, sensation, and so forth. When the human being dies, the atoms, the soul atoms, leave the body. And once the soul atoms are no longer working in conjunction with the rest of the body, then there is no longer any possibility of feeling or sensation. So death is like entering an eternal, dreamless sleep. And because after death one cannot feel pain, Epicurus says that there's no reason to fear death. In death, there is no suffering. At least after you're dead, there is no suffering because there is no possibility of sensation. All right. So atomism states that the only existing things, the only things that can be said to be real are bodies, right? Clusters of atoms, matter. Atomism is a materialism. It's a form of materialism which states that what is real is what is physical. If it has a body, it is real. So there are no such things as any kind of spiritual essences or ghosts or gods or souls understood in a spiritual sense. None of that exists if atomism is correct. Okay, the quote in question 4 is an attack on what Epicurus views as the anthropomorphization of the gods. And remember, to anthropomorphize means to treat something that is not human as if it had human characteristics. And Epicurus rejects the commonplace belief that gods are basically superhuman beings endowed with intelligence and emotions and will, and that they actively intervene in human affairs. He considers that an anthropomorphization, treating gods as if they were human-like beings. So true piety for Epicurus, it involves recognizing the truth about the nature of things, and that means embracing the cosmology of atomism and all of the implications of atomism, namely that divine intervention or divine providence are fictions that are inconsistent with the truth about atomism, and a rejection of the belief in an afterlife. Because if atomism is true and the soul is made up of atoms, and that at the point of death the soul atoms disperse and no longer afford the possibility of sensation, then there is no such thing as an afterlife, and therefore there is no reason to fear divine retribution or going to hell, right? Okay, so for Epicurus, the soul is made up of atoms, right? The soul is a body. It is physical, right? And at the moment of death, there is no longer the possibility of sensation or feeling or consciousness, right? When you die, your ego, your personal identity, your awareness, all of that disappears forever. So Epicurus is a hedonist, which means that he views the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain as the highest objects of human aspiration, right? If you want to be happy, according to Epicurus, you want to do everything you can to avoid pain and embrace pleasure. So, but he's not a vulgar hedonist. He doesn't believe that you should overindulge in food and drink and sexual activity and so forth. He's not that kind of hedonist, right? For Epicurus, as he famously says, I think it's in section 5 or 6, he says that all acts of choice and avoidance ought to be referred to the health of the soul and of the body. So the goal is to have a healthy soul, by which he means freedom from disturbance, freedom from fear and stress and anxiety on the one hand, so serenity, right? And then a healthy soul, a healthy body. So by which he means living a healthy lifestyle, making healthy lifestyle choices, right? Eating simple, healthy food, getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, right? A simple life. If you can achieve both, then you will have achieved happiness. And that means that sometimes you have to avoid choosing certain pleasures and embrace certain pains, right? So you have to look at the long-term effects, right? So the goal is to pursue pleasures that are long-term, that are long-lasting, right? As opposed to pleasures that are short but intense and which bring a surplus of pain in the long term. So getting very drunk, let's say, might be pleasant in the short term, but you will suffer long-term negative, painful consequences like a hangover, or you might get in an accident, or destroy your liver, and so forth. So the goal is to look for the long-term pleasure when you're making you have to make a distinction between beneficial and harmful pleasures and pains. Okay, number 7 is this is probably the hardest question on the list. I'm not going to go through the answer choices, but I will say this. If you can get this right, then you really have a handle on Epicurean philosophy. So the question is asking you to think the argument he presents from atomism to hedonism. How does the atomistic vision of the universe lead you to conclude that that serenity, peace of mind is yours if you embrace atomism? What are the steps that you take, right? I'll go through them very, very quickly. I don't want to give this away. I want you to figure this out on your own, because I know you can if you think it through. So atomism states that the universe is made up of atoms and void. Void is empty space, the space filled up by the atoms. So if atomism is true, then the human being must be made up of atoms, must be nothing more than a body. And if the soul is also made up of atoms, and if when you die, the soul atoms disperse and are no longer working in conjunction with the rest of the body, and if once that happens, there's no longer the possibility of sensation, of feeling, of consciousness, then death is essentially the extinction of your ego, of your awareness, which means that there is no afterlife. Because when you die, you basically, everything fades to black, so to speak. So if atomism is true, then there's no need to fear the afterlife, in a hellish afterlife in which you will be punished by vengeful gods who are judging you, right? And if that's the case, then you should have peace of mind knowing that that once you're dead, you have nothing to fear. You can no longer suffer, right? So that peace of mind, that serenity, is the foundation for your happiness, for your inner peace, so to speak. So that's basically the trajectory that the argument takes in Epicurus. That's how you get from atomism, from a particular cosmology and understanding of, or an explanation of the way the universe is structured, all the way to the goal of human aspiration, which for Epicurus is serenity, tranquility. All right, so Epicurus in sections 5 and 6 is very careful to distinguish between pains that are beneficial and pains that are harmful. So exercising would be a beneficial pain. It leads to long-term positive consequences like good health, for example. Overeating would be a harmful pleasure because it leads to long-term negative consequences like obesity and diabetes and all sorts of other ailments, hypertension, heart disease, etc. Right? So you have to be able to distinguish between pains and pleasures that are beneficial and harmful, and choose only the ones that are beneficial. Right? He doesn't talk about the way in which hedonism, vulgar hedonism, may undermine one's attachment to conventional morality. He doesn't seem to get into that question. So in order to live well for Epicurus, you need a simple, healthy lifestyle without any stress or anxiety, and friendship is very important, right? Okay, so the ultimate foundation for happiness in Epicurus is peace of mind and health. If you have peace of mind and health, you have reached the summit of human happiness. Okay, let's switch now to the chapter on St. Thomas Aquinas. Remember, there are 4 basic characteristics of all laws. Right? A law, in order to be a law, it has to be an ordinance of reason. It has to be rational, right? Made by whoever has authority in the community, by the king or the president or whoever who has care over the community, right? Whoever's in charge. It has to be made known or promulgated. That's the word that he uses. It has to be promulgated. And most importantly, it has to aim at the good of the whole. It has to aim at the common good. So if it does not aim at the common good, it is not a law. It is tyrannical. And law is preeminently concerned for St. Thomas Aquinas, maybe not for us today, but for Aquinas, it is concerned with making human beings good, to steering them in a direction in which they become better human beings. So the law has a moral dimension for St. Thomas. And there are 4 types of law that he discusses in the reading: the eternal, divine, natural, and human. Now, for a law to be legitimate, right, it has to satisfy all four of those conditions we mentioned in the beginning, right? Okay, so if you think of a law that does not aim at the common good, such as segregation statutes in the American South, right, which treated equals as if they were unequals, right? That law, according to St. Thomas and according to common sense, would be tyrannical. It would not be legitimate because it does not aim at the common good, right? Now, for the eternal law, basically that is for St. Thomas synonymous or identical with God's reason, God's mind, right? So according to Thomas, God is in charge of sort of everything that happens in the universe. He is steering the course of history towards a predetermined goal. So God's ultimate plan and providential plan for the cosmos and for humanity is essentially God's eternal law. And it cannot be seen, it cannot be understood by the human mind, at least not in this life. Right? Therefore, God has to reveal that part of his providential plan that he wants us to know. He has to reveal it to us through divine law, through sacred scripture. Right? It's called revealed religion for a reason, right? Because the human mind cannot grasp God's plan by itself. The human mind is not strong enough to penetrate those mysteries. Therefore, God has to reveal his plan to us in the form of the Bible. So yeah, we need to have divine law simply because mankind is incapable on its own of understanding God's plan. Okay. Oops. Here we are, number 8. So in natural law, where St. Thomas, natural law has, he describes it as man's participation in the eternal law. And I think what he means by that is we are participating in God's providential plan by living in accordance with our nature, our God-given nature. In other words, God, for St. Thomas, had designed us, created us to live in a certain way, right? And insofar as we live in accordance with our God-given nature, we are living correctly, right? And he talks about 4 inclinations, right? There are 4 natural inclinations which all human beings have by virtue of being human, right? So let's go through each one of those. So the first inclination is self-preservation, right? All living things have an inclination, an instinct, if you will, to preserve themselves, right? To protect your life. So to live well means you have to obey that inclination. So live in a manner which is consistent with it by, let's say, living a healthy way, taking care of your body, right? Protecting yourself, not taking any unnecessary or irrational risks, right? And of course, suicide is a sin right off the bat, right? Because that's a direct violation of that natural inclination, right? The second inclination is to procreate and to rear offspring. So we have a natural inclination to reproduce, not just to reproduce, but to take care of our young, right? So, something like the family would have to be a part of this scheme, right? And then the third inclination is to live in society. So for Thomas, we are by nature inclined to live in communities, to live with other human beings, right? And the final inclination, the highest, if you will, the one that is most uniquely human, is the desire to know the truth about God, right? So we are created with an intellectual curiosity, with a mind, with intelligence, and it is meant to be used to know God, to learn about God, right? So insofar as you live in a manner that is consistent with your nature, with those 4 inclinations, you are living correctly. You're living well, according to St. Thomas. Insofar as you deviate from your natural inclinations, you are living badly, okay? Or sinfully, you might say. All right. So number 11 is arguably the most difficult question in the chapter 5 questions. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. And if you think about it, I think you can get it right. So we know that God is the author of the natural law, of course. In order for a human law or a man-made law to be grounded in the natural law, it has to be consistent with those 4 inclinations. Now, not all man-made laws are grounded in the natural law. There are some man-made laws that are contrary to the natural law. I think Thomas would argue that the law in Oregon, in the state of Oregon, which allows physician-assisted suicide, right, would be inconsistent with the natural law principle, particularly the inclination to self-preservation. It would be a violation of that. So that might be an example of a man-made law that is not grounded in the natural law. It's important to recognize that the natural law is, for St. Thomas, can be understood even without reference to the Bible, right? You can come to know that you have these 4 inclinations without having access to the teachings of the Bible, right? So Socrates could have certainly knew about the instinct of self-preservation. He was aware that that was something that was common to human beings, that we have an instinct to reproduce and to care for offspring, that we are meant to live in communities with other human beings, and that we have a natural curiosity to know the truth about God or about the universe. I mean, that's essentially philosophy, right, that he's talking about. Now, man's natural inclinations are the same. They are universal. They're the same no matter what place you're in or what time you're in. Human nature does not change, according to St. Thomas. Right? So people will have an instinct to procreate, whether they're in imperial China or in 21st century Texas. Right? Human nature is universal and unchanging. All right. So again, I cannot stress this enough. The natural law can be understood. It can be understood without reference to the Bible. It can be understood on its own, right? Okay, so human law, right? Remember, it's made by human beings, but in order to be legitimate, it has to be consistent with the natural law. And if it doesn't satisfy the 4 conditions of law that we mentioned at the beginning of our Chapter 5 presentation, then it is not a valid law. Okay, we got to be able to distinguish between nature and convention, right? So nature is what is fixed, what is unchanging, right? Convention is what exists by human habit or custom. So whereas nature is fixed, convention is changeable, constantly changing, right? So by nature, I, as a man, am unable to give birth. Because I'm a man, I cannot have a womb, right? That's by nature, and that's fixed. That cannot be changed. But by convention, we drive on the right-hand side of the road in the United States, but in Japan, they drive on the left-hand side of the road, right? That's a convention. That changes, okay? All right, let's move on quickly to Chapter 6. So for Hobbes, the early modern political philosopher, right? We are, all human beings are animated by a desire for power and survival, right? Self-preservation. So for Hobbes, we enter into civil society, we enter into the social contract, not out of a love of our fellow human being, not out of a concern for the welfare of others, or not out of a desire, a spontaneous desire to work cooperatively and collaboratively with other human beings. No. For Hobbes, we enter society simply for selfish reasons in order to secure our own survival and self-preservation, as well as for the sake of pleasure, right? You're more likely to live a comfortable, pleasant, hedonistic life living in a society cooperating with others than you are living in the state of nature where you are constantly at risk of violent death. So in the state of nature section of the reading, which is sections 3 through 5, life, he says, is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, right? life is dreadful. There's no peace, there's no security, there are no property rights, there's no police force, there's no law, there's no justice, there's no technology, there's no architecture or agriculture, none of that. It's basically like living in the jungle. Okay. All right. Number 4, Hobbes is, I'm not going to give away the answer. I'm going to let you figure it out. But Hobbes is contrasting or comparing two alternatives. And he clearly prefers one of the two alternatives. And I'll let you figure out which one it is. But he's saying we could either live as law-abiding, respectable citizens in the civil society, right? Or we could be tyrants who control, who dominate everyone, and who own all the wealth. Now, which of the two, according to Hobbes, do you think he thinks most human beings would prefer? To be a respectable, law-abiding, tax-paying, middle-class citizen, or to be a tyrant who has all the wealth, all the power, and enjoys all of the pleasure he could desire? I'll let you figure that one out. Number 5, I saw this sign on a billboard about a year ago. Drive safely, the life you save may be your own. Right? This is one of the two versions of the Golden Rule. So I'll give you a hint. It's either B or C, but I'm going to let you figure out which one it is. All right. For Hobbes, censorship is necessary because if you want to secure peace and stability, you have to have some kind of thought control. He makes this argument in section, I want to say it's section 10, at the end of section 10, that the best way to control people's actions is to control their thoughts, their opinions. If you want people to behave in an orderly fashion, in a law-abiding fashion, then it would help to control their thoughts and opinions about certain things. And that way you can kind of steer them in the direction you want them to go without having to have a policeman on every single corner. Although you need that too, but it's not enough. You control people's hearts and minds, you will control their actions. Okay, so good and evil for Hobbes, who is a hedonist, refer to pleasure and pain. Simple as that. Okay, the state of nature. The state of nature is the exact opposite of civilization, right? So what makes a society civil? Well, you have law and order, you have respect for property rights, you have courts of justice, you have police forces, you have rules, you have education, you have science and art and philosophy, cooperation, you have comfortable lifestyles. So the state of nature would be the opposite of all of that. All right, so for Hobbes, the worst thing that could ever befall a human being is to die a violent death, right? And the highest good for Hobbes is basically to enjoy pleasure and survival, comfortable self-preservation, right? He's a hedonist. He's a vulgar hedonist, essentially. Okay, in the state of nature, profit is the measure of right. That basically is another way of stating might makes right. He who has the power makes the rules, and he's the one who is in the right. So if you have power, you can do whatever you want. All right. There is no morality in the state of nature. The only law, so to speak, is the law of self-preservation. And for Hobbes, you do whatever you have to do to preserve your life and to gain power. So Aquinas and Hobbes would not really agree on anything, to be honest. They are polar opposites. Aquinas believes in a human soul that is immortal, believes in a natural basis for morality. Right? Hobbes is a materialist. He does not believe there's a natural basis for morality. In the state of nature, morality, there is no morality. It's simply a struggle for survival. you don't get morality until you enter into civil society. So morality or justice, they're both conventional. They're rooted in human custom. They are enshrined in the laws, the man-made laws, but there's no standard of justice or right that transcends man-made laws. Okay, so morality is conventional in Hobbes, but natural in Aquinas. All right, so number 12, the social contract theory, right? For Hobbes, the social contract is the only way we can get out of the state of nature, right? So we have to enter into the social contract in order to avoid the perils of the state of nature, which is full of violence and death. In the social contract, we surrender our conscience, and the law becomes our conscience, right? There is no freedom of expression. There's no freedom of inquiry. You have censorship, so you don't get to just read anything that you want. You can only read what the government will let you read because they want to control your thoughts, so as to make you docile and obedient. And you need people to be obedient in order for there to be law and order, for there to be stability in the society, because stability means peace, and peace means safety, and safety means self-preservation. And for Hobbes, the goal of life, the goal of politics, is to produce and maintain comfortable self-preservation. Okay, so which of the following best captures the difference between Hobbes's law of nature and natural law in Aquinas? Well, right, for Hobbes, it's all about survival. It's all about self-preservation, doing whatever you have to do to preserve your life. For Aquinas, natural law is the natural basis for morality, for living well, and it involves living in society, working cooperatively with others, respecting other people, not giving offense to anyone that you live with, procreating, taking care of your offspring, and knowing the truth about God, right? For Hobbes, it's really all about self-preservation. Okay, let me quickly go over the essay questions. So be able to distinguish between vulgar hedonism and Epicurean hedonism. So vulgar hedonism is just the pursuit of bodily pleasure, right? Epicurean hedonism is much more refined and sophisticated, right? It distinguishes between higher and lower pleasures, or beneficial and harmful pleasures and pains. So it stresses serenity, health of the soul, and health of the body. So living a simple, healthy lifestyle, and enjoying serenity and tranquility and peace of mind. That's what characterizes Epicurean hedonism, right? Okay, so St. Thomas on natural law. So where does it come from? Who made the natural law? What is the definition of natural law? What are the four inclinations? You have to state those. How does living in accordance with those inclinations lead to living well? How can we deduce a more elaborate moral code just from meditating on or thinking about those four inclinations, right? Lastly, imagine you stumble upon a burning orphanage. There are terrified children inside who cannot get out, right? The only way they could escape is if you were to run in and risk your own life to help them get out. Now, according to Hobbes, I'm not asking what you would do in this situation. I'm asking what Hobbes thinks you ought to do if you're rational in this kind of situation. What would he say a rational person would do in that situation? Would he run in and help the kids at the risk of his own life, or would he find some other way? Would he react in some other way, right? In a way that would not risk his safety, right? Tie that response into Hobbes's discussion of human nature, psychological egoism, and hedonism, the state of nature argument, and how that leads to the social contract, right? There's a connection between Hobbes's state of nature argument and the reasons for wanting to leave the state of nature, and how one would react according to Hobbes in this scenario. Okay, and also please mention the golden rule. That would be helpful as well. All right, well, thank you for participating in this review, and I wish you luck on the test. Thanks, bye-bye.